because it was the first thing that made my head quiet. It was the first thing that made me feel confident, and I felt like I could say what was on my mind, and I didn't care what people thought about me, and I felt like I fit in my skin, and that constant chatter, it was just the first time that it was gone, and I didn't feel depressed and I didn't feel anxious, and I was like, oh my God, this is going to be the thing that lets me do life and to do it well and to do it normally.
Sometimes I make mistakes in my life. Life goes on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah. Hey, I got wisdom from my papa. He ain't have a lot of money, but he taught me how to keep the perfect posture. So folding under pressure, that ain't something that I'm about to. Crabs in the barrel, I'm just trying to be a lobster. I hit my cousin, told him to call. It's been 12 years and I ain't heard from him at all. Had a little fallout over some money. Damn, ain't it funny how the smartest people be beefing like they some dummies? But I hope you doing swell now. Hope your family well now.
Welcome to Primary Purpose Podcast with Pej. I am Pej. I'm the host of this podcast. I have a very special guest today. Her name is Kimberly.
Hi.
Hi. Kimberly and I have known each other for a bunch of years. Our topic today is going to be emotional sobriety. Kim, how long have you been sober?
I took 7 years in July.
Okay. And I've had you, so we've done some filming in the past. I don't even know. I had some other podcasts before. I don't know if it was a podcast or if it was for one of my YouTube videos, but I remember that back then, you were on there and it was really cool to hear your story. But I know that over the years now, things have gone in different directions. And I think that we picked a really good topic for today, emotional sobriety. I don't think there's a lot of people that get sober, but they don't know how to manage their emotions, and there's sometimes a roller coaster of a ride in that process. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about, for those that don't know who you are, a little about your past and like what, how you grew up, where you grew up, and kind of get into your story and the addiction, the alcoholism, and then we'll get into the other stuff too, the topic.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm from here in Orange County. I got loaded here. I got sober here, and I've stayed sober here. I started drinking and using at 14. I'm one of those people who I showed a lot of dysfunction and a lot of those symptoms of addiction and alcoholism before I ever started drinking and using. So when I found drugs and alcohol, I was like, oh my God, this is my solution to everything that I'm feeling internally.
How old were you then?
I think I was around 14, my first drink.
And it was drinking first? Yeah.
Yeah, it was aged tequila. I filled up a whole red cup. I ended up alcohol poisoning my very first night drinking. And the next morning I woke up and was just like, that was awesome. Let's do it again. Because it was the first thing that ever made me feel better.
Well, when you talk about alcohol poisoning, does that mean you had to go to the hospital?
So I threw up all over myself. I got dragged onto the driveway, sprayed down with the garden hose, and then they just kind of left me dry heaving on the bathroom floor because they didn't really know what to do with me. But the symptoms that they were describing the next morning, I was like, oh my God, I had alcohol poisoning.
So was this a party or something?
Yeah, it was a party
They
with the
hosed
volleyball.
you down?
Yeah, they literally like hosed me. I woke up in different clothes, and then all of my clothes were in like a plastic baggie on top of the toilet, and I just like woke up on my back, just like spitting up, like throw up. It was disgusting.
14.
Yeah.
And then you went on to continue to keep drinking regardless.
Yeah, drinking and using, I was like, that was awesome because it was the first thing that made my head quiet. It was the first thing that made me feel confident, and I felt like I could say what was on my mind, and I didn't care what people thought about me, and I felt like I fit in my skin, and that constant chatter, it was just the first time that it was gone, and I didn't feel depressed and I didn't feel anxious, and I was like, oh my God, this is going to be the thing that lets me do life and to do it well and to do it normally.
In the amount of time that you've been sober, the 7 years, have you ever tried to delve deep into your past and see like where the chatter, the loud head even originated from?
Yeah, actually, I have been doing EMDR. For anyone who doesn't know, EMDR is a form of trauma therapy. And I've been doing it for about 2.5 years. And when I went into my therapist and because after the fifth person tells you need to do trauma therapy, you're like, okay, I think the universe is talking to me and this is something I need to go do. So I brought it to my therapist and I said, hey, I think I need to do this. And she says, okay, what do we need to do EMDR on? And I said, I don't really know. The way I described it is I just felt like there was this trapdoor in my childhood and I didn't really know what was underneath it, but there was just kind of this darkness and I didn't really know what I was going to find, but I knew that a lot of my answers were there. And then I, of course, had examples of like, you know, the things that we walk through in our addiction, of course, are deeply traumatic. And so I knew there was a lot of stuff from like adulthood that I needed to look at, but there was a lot of childhood stuff that I was like, I don't know it's here, but I know that I need to look at it.
Mm-hmm. So then when the alcohol or the drugs were starting to actually give you some results and quiet the head, is this something that you just continue doing all throughout your adolescent period, through your high school period?
Absolutely. I'm one of those people who was off and running from day one. It wasn't something that gradually ramped up. Like I'm going through my parents' medicine cabinet I'm just taking things to see how it makes me feel.
Like what? Like what kind of things?
Honestly, I don't even remember what it was. I'm just like I remember trying to figure out can not prescriptions, can antibiotics, like I'm Googling, can I get high off of antibiotics? And just like I'm drinking cough syrup and just anything that I can find, I'm going to try and see if it'll make me feel different.
So you were looking for an effect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Most definitely. Anything to change the process of the way that you thought or felt. And then throughout those times, what was the other substances that you got into?
I dabbled in a lot of different things. By the end of high school, it was alcohol, it was Adderall, it was cocaine, so a lot of uppers. And then through college, by the end of college...
So you made it to college, so you finished high school on time and everything?
Yeah, I finished high school and I was actually given a full ride to go play volleyball in college. And my parents had kind of sat me down that summer, and it wasn't entirely an intervention, but it was a confrontation to just kind of say, hey, look, we know what you're doing. They'd found an 8-ball in my backpack like my junior year. And so they knew what I was doing, and they just kind of sat me down and said, hey, we know what's going on. You can either go get sober or you can go to college, but if you get kicked out of school for what you're doing, you can't come back home. And so they kind of gave me this ultimatum, and I
kind of go get sober as in like go to treatment?
Yeah.
At the age, what was that, like 17, 18?
18.
18? So what did you choose?
I chose college because the thought of getting sober was like the scariest thing in the world. I was like, no, drugs and alcohol, this is my solution. This is the only thing that's ever made life bearable. Why on earth am I going to be willing to give it up? And the consequences weren't bad. I didn't really have very many consequences yet. And so I was like, giving it up doesn't seem worth it.
So even with the using and drinking and the partying and all that stuff, you were still athletic and active?
Yeah, I was really big on like, how much can I use and still function? It was kind of just constantly like a little experiment of how much can we use but still get done what we need to do today. So I don't like to use the term high functioning because I think if we refer to ourselves as high functioning, we have a really low standard for functioning. Like I'm there, I'm getting things done. I am not emotionally present. I am not emotionally aware, but I'm showing up to stuff and I'm like checking off the boxes, but I'm not really living.
How were you performing in college as far as academically, athletically, all that?
Academically was a struggle. I was on probation a number of times. I was...
Usually if somebody gets put on academic probation, it's a good indicator that something's not something's not right internally.
Oh, absolutely.
Could be addiction, it could be mental.
Well, and they had also come to me about my drinking. I was suspended twice for drinking. I was suspended for getting freshman drunk my sophomore year.
Freshman drunk?
I was getting the freshman girls.
You were getting the freshman girls.
Yeah, the
drunk.
freshman girls on the volleyball team. I would take them out drinking, and so so I got in trouble for that. I got in trouble for my drinking.
Is that because they were underage?
I actually went to my first school before I got kicked out. My first school was a Christian school where you sign a contract saying that you won't drink or use drugs, which like I still to this
So it doesn't matter what age, you were supposed to all be
exactly.
good girls.
None of us were supposed to be drinking. So
okay. So then you got in trouble for that stuff, but still you continued to party.
Yeah, nothing really slowed me down. I would go for like maybe a week where I'd be like, okay, like I'm gonna be good. And then after a week, I'd be like, why am I doing this again? And then I'd just go straight back to what I was doing. Nothing really ever slowed me down.
Okay. And then behaviorally, like relationship wise, or certain behaviors that you displayed or portrayed.
As a train wreck.
Okay. Explain a little bit.
I was just chaos in people's lives. I was incredibly selfish and self-absorbed. I was oblivious. Everything was about me. I couldn't ever show up for anybody else. I couldn't make anything about anybody else. I was in a lot of self-pity and wallowing in like depression, or I'm like, hey, your problem is that you don't drink enough, just drink your problems away. And so I'm just this really like shallow, self-centered, dysfunctional person. And I took pride in that. Like I really wore it like this badge of honor, because I felt like, well, if I own it about myself, then I don't care if you have a problem with it. So I like kind of pretended to like really take ownership of it, when the reality was that like I hated myself. I just didn't think I was capable of being any other way.
Whoa. So throughout, did you finish school? Did you do, how many years were you in college?
It took me 5 years to graduate. I made it 3 years at the Christian school, and then ended up getting my scholarship cut, and was told that like, hey, you got to go, or you got to change what you're doing. And I was like, I'm not going to change what I'm doing. So I ended up transferring to a Division I school, got a full ride. I took a sob story there. I was like, oh, I was, discriminated against by this Christian school. And so they bought it and they gave me a full ride. And
full ride is in another scholarship?
yeah. And I got my 4th and 5th year paid for, because I already knew I'd failed so many classes. I was going to take 5 years to graduate.
And the scholarship was because of volleyball, or?
Yeah, so I went and I played volleyball at over at Cal State Fullerton, actually.
Okay.
And I by the end of that 4th year, I'm homeless. I'm smoking meth and heroin.
Whoa! Slow down a sec here.
Oh yeah.
Homeless?
Yeah.
Like it got like that?
Well, because I was supposed to be living at my parents' house,
Yeah.
and I was getting loaded, and so they're like, "You can't come home."
Okay, so that whole thing that they said to you before, now they were living up to their word that either go get help at that younger age,
Right.
or go to college. But if you screw this up, there's your ultimatum, like you're done.
Right. And they'd actually given me a second chance and let me move back in with them, because I go to them and I express all this remorse, and I'm going to be different.
How old were you then? 22, 23?
I guess it's 21.
Oh, 21.
Or I guess 21 or 22.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got to live with them temporarily?
Yeah, they gave me a second chance to come back and to do things differently. And a few months into that first semester, they're like, nope, you're doing the same stuff. And
I was just going to ask, how long did that last?
Not long at all.
Not even
a couple
6
months. Yeah. And so I started living out of the locker room. The women's volleyball team and basketball team shared a locker room, and there was just like a little code to get in. And so there was a couch in there, and I was just sleeping on the couch in there, like stealing from the girls on the team, and not really like showing up to class every once in a while.
So you slept in the locker room, and nobody like at night told you can't be here?
Nobody was really ever in there at night, because I was keeping crazy hours, because I'm doing stimulants, and I'm out and getting loaded with people.
Did you say meth?
Yeah, I was doing meth and heroin.
And heroin.
Yeah.
Mixing the two.
No, I didn't mix. It was always one or the other, depending on what I wanted to do that day. So.
I mean, I would never imagine that you did heroin.
I get that a lot. Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a compliment, I guess, when people are like, I can't imagine you doing that. Or like, even the other day I had some people like, I can't imagine you being a bully. And I'm like, that is such a compliment, because I was not a nice person.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point you were homeless. How long do you think you were living like that?
I didn't stay in school the whole time. I technically was still enrolled, but as soon as the volleyball season ended, I took off and I ended up like hitchhiking across the country, and I was squatting in Denver for like 7 months. And so, I mean, and then I came back to Orange County, and then I'm motel hopping, and
It had gotten that bad.
yeah, so on and off. I mean, it was like about 2 years, but like I'm still like showing up to class just enough, and I'm like getting C's, and I'm just, doing the bare minimum to get by.
But this whole going across the country, school was put on the back burner then?
So I was still enrolled, and then what I did, because I'm a manipulator, when I got back from Denver, I would go to my professors and I would be like, hey, like I have mental health problems, and I've been going to get help for them, and that's why I haven't been in school. Like, can you give me extra credit? Can you let me retake tests? And most of the professors were willing to work with me, and they let me do it. And so I think that semester, even though I was gone like half the semester, I still passed half of my classes that semester.
It's amazing that you were using drugs the way that you were, but you still had the smarts to know how to work the system educationally, like to be able to complete stuff.
Well, I was motivated because I knew that I had a habit that I needed to be able to support. And I didn't because when I was homeless, right, I'm panhandling and I'm begging for money.
I was going to ask you, how were you affording drugs?
A lot of it was just people giving me money. People just give you drugs sometimes when you're out there traveling.
That's kind of like that wasn't from my era. Like in the society that we live in right now, a lot of addicts give drugs away.
Well, and this was in 2012 when I was hitchhiking. So this was like more than 10 years ago. But yeah, it was like I like hop in a truck and like the first thing that they do is like offer me some pills because like they don't want to get loaded alone.
What was the psychology of hitchhiking across country? Why did you go?
So it was a guy, and I met a guy and his friend in Huntington Beach, and this was a couple months before that, and they had hitchhiked from Chicago.
Yeah.
And they were just telling me all these like cool stories, and like if you've ever read Factotum by Charles Bukowski, like it really romanticizes like, you know, hopping from train to train and hitchhiking and living outside of society. And
Like a vagabond.
Exactly. Like I really, like we called ourselves
gypsy.
We called ourselves traveling kids.
Yeah.
And like it was like, oh, society's the problem, and like we're enlightened and we're elevated, and it was like this really like delusional like arrogance that we had about
Just
what we were
young
doing.
kids that are lost on their path, but like self-proclaimed voyagers.
Yes, exactly.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So, and then you did that, and you made your way back to California. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then.
I reconnected with this guy who I'd kind of been on and off with since high school, and he had just gotten out of prison, and he was sober. He like wasn't involved in any kind of like recovery program. He was just kind of sober
Just
on
kind
his
of
own.
dry sober.
Exactly. And he wanted to stay that way, but I don't like to get loaded by myself. And so I pushed, and he eventually started to get loaded with me. And then within a few months, he had overdosed and passed away. And so that was kind of the first.
This was your boyfriend at the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, kind of not. It was like a very flighty, like dysfunctional relationship. So we were both getting loaded, but yeah, it was just this constant like on and off again thing. And he disappeared, and then the next thing I know, a month later, I got a call from someone that he'd overdosed and that he passed away. And
how'd that make you feel, or were you just too numb to even feel it?
I mean, I fell apart. I lost it.
You did?
Oh, I lost it. I was like inconsolable, and it at first it pushed me deeper into my use. And then I kind of had this moment of not real clarity, but enough clarity to know that this is where I'm headed if I don't change what I do. And I hated how I felt just enough to try and change a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so I'd kind of labeled, the hard drugs are the problem. So I'm just going to get off the hard drugs. I'm going to do the light stuff, and I'm going to go try and like grow up a little bit. But to me, grow up didn't mean go to therapy or get sober. It meant like, let's get an adult job in like the corporate world, and let's make more money, and let's look nice on the outside, and let's look functional. And so I did that. But it didn't change anything. I'm still me.
Being a former heroin user, I mean, right, if you're sober 7 years, that's around the time when fentanyl was starting to kind of take off. Do you think you ever did that, or do you know if you did?
No, I definitely didn't, because the last time that I used heroin was because I haven't used heroin since my ex overdosed
since he
and
overdosed.
passed.
So then you lightened the drugs, or you just did other drugs?
I just did other drugs. So
like what?
I was just drinking really heavily. I was on Adderall every day. I was taking Ativan. I was smoking weed.
What was the point of being on Adderall for school?
It was for work. So I had a job. I worked in property management, which is like a very like chaotic, high, like fast-paced sort of job.
A lot of expectations.
Exactly. And so it's just
Gotta
about
get
like
shit done.
Constant production. And so I'm taking like 100 milligrams of Adderall every single
Prescribed
day.
or not prescribed?
It was prescribed.
Did you abuse it?
Absolutely.
In what sense? Were you just taking pills, or were you snorting it, or were you?
I was just taking too much of it. Yeah. I was taking it. I was just, orally taking it, but like I was taking I would save it up, and then
the doctor was always
a ton of it.
Just refilling.
Yeah, they didn't really ask a lot of questions. And that's the thing too, because I used to like blame them and be like, they were feeding my addiction. But it's like, I'm going in there and I'm lying. Like I'm not telling anyone the truth.
Right. Okay. So then where'd your life, like what direction did your life go in then?
My life just got really small because I'm an alcoholic. I do everything obsessively, and my whole world became that job. And
where were you living then?
At this time I had 2 different boyfriends. and they were both alcoholic. And
Two different boyfriends at the same time?
Well, there was some overlap, but two different ones across 3 years, and so they were mostly separate.
Okay,
and
mostly.
So I moved in with the one guy up in North Hollywood, and then was commuting down to Orange County.
So you were living in LA too?
Yeah. So and every single day driving down to Irvine for work, and then driving back up, and we drank every day, and so I find people that get loaded the same way that I do, and so he lets me live there. I don't pay rent, and then after a year and a half, I start cheating on him, and then I start seeing this new guy who I worked with, and then moved my stuff out of the old boyfriend's apartment, moved it into the new guy's apartment, and just kept doing what I was doing.
Okay. At this point, you were probably in your mid-20s? Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah, so I worked that job from 23 to 27, and then 27 was when I got sober.
And what was your breaking point? What even brought you into the path of recovery 100%?
It was a just rapid deterioration in my mental health. So for the longest time, the drugs and the alcohol did exactly what I needed them to do. And then about 6 months before I got sober, I don't know what happened. It just felt like this switch had flipped, and all of a sudden it stopped working. It didn't quiet my mind.
The drugs and alcohol?
Exactly. It didn't quiet my mind anymore. And I became really isolated, really, really depressed. And I started to notice people around me, because at 27, like, you know, a lot of people are kind of outgrowing the heavy drinking and the recreational drug use, and they're kind of getting their shit together.
Yeah.
Like, you know, they're starting families, and they have career goals, and they're getting promoted, and they're buying houses or condos, and, you know, they're achieving these milestones. And I'm kind of looking at my life and myself, and I'm
where
just
am I
like,
going?
Everything is a dead end.
Yeah.
And I have no resolve. Like every time I try to put my mind to something, it's like I change my mind 2 hours later, and it's out the window, and I forget that I ever tried to do it. And so I just became really aware that, like, I'm not capable of these kinds of things, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
And so I was aware that I was different and that there was something very wrong with me, but I didn't know what. And so I just got really, really depressed, and I was suicidal. And then I started going into psychosis and becoming really, really unstable.
Natural psychosis or drug induced?
It was drug induced, but it would hang around even once the drugs were out of my system.
Drug induced from which drug?
It was a combination of a lot of it. Honestly, the first one was like a really bad acid trip that I think kind of started the whole thing.
Like a psychotic break?
Yeah, but after that, sometimes I would just drink, and I would just go into psychosis just from drinking. But especially it was... I started mixing Ativan and alcohol. And so I think the benzos with the alcohol was really problematic.
Oh, wow. So you decided at 27 to get sober. Did you go to treatment?
I did. What actually got me to go to treatment was a suicide attempt. And so I overdosed, and I was in a coma on life support. And so... after that, and then I still got loaded one more time after that. And so I went back to a therapist, and she told me, hey, you need to go to treatment. I said, I'll get sober when I'm 30. She says, you're not going to make it to 30. You need to go to rehab. And
like
so,
now.
Exactly.
And that was 27.
That was at 27.
But this suicide attempt ended you up, on a hold for 72 hours, 14 days?
They didn't put me on a hold because I refused to admit that it was a suicide attempt. Every time they asked me what happened, I just kept saying, I don't remember. I remembered, but I was terrified.
But because it was an overdose, they hospitalized you.
Yeah.
But not long.
I was in the hospital for about 4 days. I think I was in the coma. I was in the coma for like 48 hours.
And you still used
after
that?
2 more days. Yeah. And it was, again, it wasn't planned. I had said, I'm never going to get loaded again. Drugs and alcohol are my problem. I want to be sober.
Yeah.
And then I went out with friends, and I was like, I'm going to stay sober. And I still ended up drinking that night. And that's when I realized I don't know how to stay sober, and I don't think I can stay sober. It was the first time I was willing to kind of go to somebody and say, I don't know what I'm doing, and I need help.
So then after getting high that next time, you went to treatment?
Yeah, that was a Saturday night, and then I was in rehab Monday morning.
And how long were you in rehab for?
I did 45 days, and it was a day treatment program. So
was it outpatient?
Yeah, it was outpatient.
Where were you living?
My parents let me move back home with them to get sober.
And then during that time, is that how you learned about recovery, like complete abstinence?
Yeah, I actually went in planning to smoke weed and saying like, hey, okay, cool, I'm just going to stay off the hard stuff. And then they were drug testing me and they're like, you're testing.
You're not allowed to smoke weed.
You can't smoke weed here. And so I was like, oh, well, that was my plan. And they're like, let's try to do nothing. And so they took me off Adderall and they told me to stop smoking weed. And I was willing because I didn't know what I was doing. And so I just did what people told me.
And so being a 27-year-old person, I mean, we see a lot of people come and go that come and test the waters of recovery and sobriety, and they get sober, people in their 20s, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of times we see them go.
Yeah.
A lot of times we see them come and stay for a little while and then go. Sometimes we see them come and go and come and go and come and go. But for you as a 27-year-old, what made you stay?
Just remembering how miserable it was at the end. And I think something that people did a really good job of explaining to me is that this picks up where it left off. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I missed drugs and alcohol. I missed what it used to do for me. But that idea that it will not do that for me anymore, I think I grasped that really well, and that motivated me to do whatever anybody told me, because I was willing to do anything to never feel that way again, because I didn't want to be alive. And so I was just convinced that that wasn't my solution anymore. And so even though that was hard and I missed it, I was convinced.
That's good convincing, but I know that along the way in the last 7 years, so I've seen you as a powerhouse in recovery, a person that truly, truly has embraced this way of life, helps tons of people. I really admire that about you a lot. It's not just women, it's men, it's all different types, doesn't matter. A lot of people look to you for guidance and help, but I know that you've had your own, during these 7 years, had some conflicts, like as far as emotionally, mentally, and things like that. Was there ever a time where you wanted to throw in the towel and not stay sober, or just throw it all away?
Oh, absolutely. There's been a number of times. The first one was over a guy. Uh-huh. The first one was over getting involved with someone who was really, really unwell. Mm-hmm. He was sober, but he was very unwell. And that, conflict within my community made me want to turn and run when things kind of blew up in my face. But I had women that told me, you can make whatever decisions that you want to in your romantic life, but do not ever let that chase you away from your fellowship. And I took that to heart, and I just kind of dug in my heels, and it was like, no matter how uncomfortable I am, I'm going to stay. So that was the first one. The second one was when we went into COVID, into lockdown.
I think COVID screwed a lot of people up worldwide, not just in the recovery world.
Yeah.
But some people in the recovery world were shook.
Yeah.
And things happened to where people had to either really evaluate their recovery or throw it away. Yeah. I mean, we watched people with 20 and 30 years of sobriety relapse.
Yeah. The hardest thing about it for me was the isolation, and it made me aware of how incredibly reliant I was on other people for my sobriety, which is the whole idea behind emotional sobriety, is that I am not reliant on anyone or anything for my sense of self, for my purpose, for my stability, for my sobriety. Mm-hmm. And what the pandemic made me aware of was that my sobriety is contingent on my ability to lean on other people, and that isn't healthy. And so the first few months, I really, really wanted to drink, and I was filled with just resentment and completely unable to accept life on life's terms. But I'm grateful because it forced me to dive deeper into my spirituality and look at what was lacking.
So what was lacking?
A lot of it was just this reliance on something bigger than myself. Mm-hmm. I think it's a miracle that I made it sober as long as I did, so self-reliant. I remember I took 2 years sober, and when I was talking about it, when I was, sharing about it, I didn't mention God once. I didn't mention my higher power once, because I still thought that I was doing this. I still thought that, well, I'm the one doing all this work. I'm the one helping all these people. I'm keeping people sober. I've changed my life, right? This idea that we think is really empowering.
Yeah.
But for me, it was really arrogant, because for me, my belief is that I'm not the one keeping me sober. And so I had to really dig deeply and say, like, are you living your life in a way that's consistent with what you're trying to practice? And the answer was no.
So it's really interesting that you bring that up because, I know that you do a lot of group facilitation and treatment centers, and you've done a lot of spiritual workshops. We've been involved in some spiritual groups together, elephants and things like that. Spiritual kindergarten, as a matter of fact, is what it used to be called. But often, like I learned or would even see these things would come out of my mouth where I was like, where did that come from? In a group where I was like, that sounded really good. I say it to them really good, but am I living it? Right. So one of them is the human ego, right? Like this self-reliance where my ego drives me. And I think it's my greatest protector. I don't want to believe that it's going to take me in dark directions.
Right.
And so the more that I think about myself and think that I know more than I actually know, then I start to actually separate myself from others and still depend on that as being my driving force. And unfortunately, what happens then is that, and I say this in groups and things, when we give more power to our ego, then the next thing you know, it's just us and our ego.
Right.
And if there's no higher power or no greater force that's really what we should be seeking as to be reliant upon, then it's us grappling the ego.
Yeah.
Which then puts us in a position where we think it's our buddy, but it really is going to bring on the depression, bring on the emotions, bring on lots of unhealed, unresolved issues that we have within ourselves that we haven't really worked through.
Right.
Which then can lead us in the path of wanting to drink, wanting to use, wanting to off ourselves, suicide, possibly, right? I mean, we see it sometimes. We've heard of people in recovery that suddenly all of a sudden you now you see them, now you don't, they take their own lives, and it's not because of drugs and alcohol.
Right.
And that goes back to the topic of emotional sobriety. So tell us a little bit about that. Like what was your personal struggles and how are you overcoming that?
Well, and even just to piggyback on that topic of ego. Have you read A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So incredible book on ego. And
I love it.
I think it's interesting because if we really look at the purpose of ego, because if ego is the sense of self, right? If you look at it through like the Fortean lens, ego is responsible for sense of self. But what creates a sense of identity is what sets me apart, what makes me unique, what makes me different. So in a really practical sense, that's why ego is constantly trying to separate me from others, because it's trying to create a sense of self. Why that's problematic in recovery is that it's constantly separating me from others and looking for how I'm different or looking for how I'm special or looking for how I don't need anybody. And then that gets in the way of my recovery. And I very much I came into recovery pretty humble and pretty just that ego smashing process.
Sure.
And it was around 9 months that it really started to show up. I had gotten through in my 12-step program, I had worked all 12 of my steps and I had started to sponsor other people. And all of a sudden I just developed this really strong sense of how things should and should not be and how people should and should not behave. And
in the recovery world?
It just in life in general,
as a whole,
this incredible arrogance that I had of I know how things should be. My way is the right way. And if you're not doing it my way, then you're doing it wrong. And just really controlling and combative and condescending. And it really, it caused conflict. And I found myself, even though I'm sober and even though I'm working on myself, I'm still constantly in conflict with other people, and I'm constantly pissing other people off, and I'm constantly filled with shame and guilt and resentment and fear. And so
it's all poison.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so.
So these days, now, how's your emotional sobriety right now? Are you on a roller coaster ride? Do you have your days? Do you have your months? Do you have your weeks? How is it? Do you feel you're stable? You're happy? You're content?
It's a multifaceted answer.
Yeah.
I would say that every single year it improves drastically. I would love to tell you, yep, I figured it all out. Emotional sobriety, we've got it, figured out, and it's great and it's perfect. And I don't rely on anything but like my higher power. But like, no, that's not the case. I think I really struggle with making work my identity and looking to work to give me like a sense of self and a sense of purpose and like looking for that validation.
Which work are we talking about? The group facilitation or what you do? Because I know you love working with animals.
Both, honestly.
Okay.
For the longest time, it was my role as a group facilitator and, wanting to feel like, okay, I'm like changing these people's lives and like I'm the best at what I do.
Yeah.
And then a lot of it started to shift into like the dog training and like the dog rehabilitation stuff. But for me, like, cause that's the thing, it doesn't matter what it is. It's just that it's something outside of me. It's something on the outside where I don't have to really look inward. I don't have to really self-reflect.
Yeah.
You can just look at what I do and you're going to tell me that I'm good enough based on the outside. And you never have to see what's on the inside.
You got married this year.
I did. Yeah.
How do you like that?
It was incredible. It was so much fun. December will be 6 years that we've been together, and Walter's also in recovery. So I'm really lucky to have a husband who is sober and who is working on himself very, very actively, who has a spiritual practice. But it was interesting. I think both of us kind of knew even before the wedding that we had things that we needed to address and that we needed to work on. But honestly, there was just so much going on leading up to the wedding. And it was like, hey, look, both of us know the things that we need to work on don't change the fact that like, I know I want to marry you.
That's so rad.
And so we got married. And then like, the excitement of that kind of like carried us through the next few months. And then after the dust settled, we kind of got faced with like, there's some issues in our relationship that we need to address and that we need to look at. And so just like with the trauma therapy, after the fifth person tells me like, hey, have you guys tried couples therapy? And I'm like, okay, I hear the universe talking to me. So I went to couples therapy. We went to couples therapy and it has been incredible.
Yeah.
Like I have never had anything feel like it's breathing life into our relationship the way that this is. It is self-reflection in a way that I've never had to look at myself. It's looking at these different parts of myself that I wasn't even aware of, like talking about like how I show up and like the example that I saw growing up and why I look at things the way that I do and how I'm still protecting myself from my partner, even though I have an incredibly safe partner. So it's been incredible.
I love that. What are your biggest struggles currently? Or even maybe in like the last, let's say 6 months to a year in your recovery process. Are there any?
Oh, absolutely. The biggest thing that I will say, like the biggest difference is that the lessons get bigger, but the process gets easier because each new challenge that I face, I have even more experience to look back on and to say, hey, we got through it. The universe took care of us. And we're going to be able to get through this next time. So the fear is less and less each time. But I would say the biggest struggles this year have been facing my childhood trauma. I constantly want to run from that.
Yeah.
Every single day I'm on my way to therapy and I'm like, do I have to? I don't want to. I'm having to like pump myself up to go in there and face that stuff every single time.
Are there ever times that you're on your way to therapy and you're enthused and ready and you're like, no?
Not a single time. I don't like therapy. I love holding space for other people, but you want to dive into my stuff and it's like the last thing that I want to do.
But after you go through each session, do you feel
it's
better?
relief, it's lightness, it's clarity every single time. So I know it's worth it. And that's what keeps me going and doing that. And then I'd say the second one is balance. Finding balance between my recovery, running a business, showing up for my husband, taking care of my dogs, spending time with my family, trying to have a social life, taking care of my physical health. I'm in recovery from an eating disorder. So like cooking food and exercising and like meditation and body consciousness. So it's like just balance. Like I don't know if it's an actual thing because I don't know that I've really ever felt it. I feel like every time I'm like doing really well in one area, I feel like I'm always neglecting something else. But it's a quality problem to have. Like it's like, oh, I have too many awesome things in my life that I'm trying to do. And so like it's a good problem to have.
I know we touched on God earlier, but would you say you're a woman of faith?
You know, it's funny. It wasn't until I had really dove into this with you. You were the first person that challenged me, because for my first 5 years sober, I identified as agnostic. And I remember you and we were sitting down and we were reading the book together, and you asked me, why do you identify as agnostic? And I said, well, I don't know. Like, I don't believe in anything with any certainty. And you said, so you think you're keeping you sober? And I was like, no, I guess not. You said, then you're not really agnostic, are you? And so it was kind of this moment of realizing, like, no, I am a woman of faith. I do believe in something. I don't need to know what that is, but I 100% believe in something.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, this was excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, we really flowed well together.
I think so. It was a lot of fun.
Great conversation. I love who you are. You're truly like one of my favorites, and it's such an honor and a privilege just to have our friendship, like, and seeing where you've gone in the last 7 years. Like, I've always thought you're a dope soul,
Thank
right?
you so much.
From the very beginning. If there's people out there struggling, which there are, people that are tuning in, if you'd be so kind, just let them know. What is your primary purpose? Since it's the newer podcast,
It is.
What is your primary purpose? And put some good energy into it.
Absolutely.
Into your answer.
I mean, today, I think that my primary purpose is to let people know that they're not alone. That was the thing that almost stopped me from ever getting to even take this journey, was being convinced that there's no one in the world that feels the way that I do. There's no one in the world that can relate, and there's no one that can help me. And so even if you're not ready to dive in yet, even if you're not ready to get better yet, that's okay. Just know that when you're ready, that there is solution out there, that there is hope, and that there is life on the other side of whatever it is that you're going through.
Thank you so much for coming on the Primary Purpose with Pej podcast. Again, this is our new podcast, and we are going to keep on making a lot more week by week. You can find us anywhere. You can find us on any podcast platform, but if you are on YouTube, it is Primary Purpose with Pej. Please be so kind as to subscribe, to like, to comment, and to share with everybody. We want to get the message of hope out to as many people as possible. Have a lovely day, and thanks, Kim.
Thank you so much, Pej.